Okay, they're slicing it. They're coming in to slice the boat now. The police have come in to slice the boat. Look at that guy, he's furious.
French cops have finally been captured tackling small boats in the water. There's a BBC camera crew conveniently on hand to film it. For months.
Imagine serving your country, putting your life on the line, only to return home and find yourself evicted, fighting for a spot on a housing list that stretches for decades. This is the reality for Gary Doyle, a British Army veteran who was forced to reset his entire university year because the roof over his head vanished. But while veterans like Gary rely on charities to keep them off the streets, a new controversy is erupting in Westminster. A proposed Labour Party scheme suggests giving asylum seekers first dibs on newly built council houses in pilot areas across the UK. It is a policy that has been described as adding insult to injury, sparking a backbench revolt and threatening Keir Starmer with what could be his most damaging U-turn yet. Today we ask, has the British social contract finally been torn up? The numbers behind Britain's housing crisis are staggering. There are currently 1.3 million families on social housing waiting lists, a 3% rise year on year. In cities like Glasgow, the wait for a 3-bedroom family home can now exceed 100 years. Essentially, you would be dead before you ever reach the front of the queue. Against this backdrop, the government's pilot scheme in 5 areas, including Brighton, Hackney and Peterborough, to fund refurbished or new council houses for unregulated arrivals, has hit the public like a cup of cold sick. Critics argue that when you have a scarcity of resources, you prioritise those who have paid into the system for a lifetime. When that priority is flipped, the foundation of public trust begins to crumble. It isn't just the opposition screaming for change. The call is coming from inside the House. Labour MP Graham Stringer has labelled the scheme unacceptable, warning that it creates a massive pull factor for criminal gangs. If you are an undocumented arrival being told that a new-build home is the reward for crossing the channel, the incentive to break the law becomes overwhelming. Stringer's rebellion highlights a growing fear within the Labour Party that they have lost touch with the fundamentals. If an MP wouldn't dare put this policy on their election leaflet, why are they trying to put it into practice? The government is desperate to clear hotels and army barracks, but by moving people into new council homes, they are trading a short-term logistics problem for a long-term political disaster. For Gary Doyle, the issue isn't theoretical, it's visceral. After being evicted from veteran accommodation, his mental health spiraled, leading to a hospital stay and a collapse in his education. When he hears that newly built homes might be handed to those whose identities we don't even know, his response is simple: it's disgusting. Gary represents a forgotten demographic of taxpayers and servicemen who feel they have become second-class citizens in their own country. His story exposes the two-tier reality of modern Britain, a system that offers human rights and dreams to those who arrive undocumented, while offering charity and resets to those who served the flag. The government claims these new houses will not be used by asylum seekers in any circumstances, but the pilot schemes tell a different story. We are witnessing a deadlock between a government trying to hide its mistakes in hotels and a public that is tired of being told to wait another 100 years. Gary Doyle is back on his feet thanks to charity, not the state. The question for Keir Starmer is no longer about logistics, it's about loyalty. Will the 15th U-turn of this administration finally prioritise the veterans on our streets, or will the dream homes continue to be used as a political pawn? The public is watching, the veterans are waiting, and the 100-year queue is not going anywhere. Police officers in Birmingham have been attacked with fireworks, fired at point-blank range, as if the city's streets had abruptly become a testing ground for chaos. The first explosions tore through the night with a violence no one anticipated. Bursts of color followed by screams, sharp cracks ricocheting off tower blocks, and the unmistakable sense that something had shifted. And from that moment, the night did not unfold, it unraveled. What began as scattered flashes quickly hardened into a coordinated assault. Rockets were launched directly at officers, sparks hammered against shields. Police vans were forced to reverse under fire. Families watched from behind locked doors as sirens tangled with smoke. The city felt trapped in a moment it had not seen coming, unsure when it would end, and even more unsure why it had begun at all. Yet beneath the noise, a deeper question formed. Why Birmingham, and why now? It was never simply about the fireworks. It was about everything that had been simmering long before the first rocket flew. To understand tonight's eruption, we must look beyond the immediate clashes and into the wider reality Birmingham has lived with for months. The force policing this city is exhausted. Officers have spoken openly about endless overtime, slipping response times, and equipment that is aging faster than it can be replaced. Britain's front line has been stretched so thin that even routine calls now feel like triage. Birmingham, with its sprawling estates, youthful population, and rapidly shifting demographics, sits at the center of these pressures. Rising youth crime has left officers responding to incidents at a pace they can no longer sustain. Communities dealing with the double burden of economic hardship and migration pressures have become increasingly frustrated. And all of it has accumulated quietly, forming the dry ground upon which tonight's sparks landed. When police issued a Section 60 order granting expansive stop and search powers, it wasn't the beginning of control. It was an acknowledgement of how fragile that control had already become. And so, even as officers pushed back against the firework volleys, the deeper story was already taking shape. Birmingham wasn't simply reacting to violence. It was revealing the conditions that had made that violence possible. The scenes in Birmingham may feel shocking, but they are rooted in national tensions Britain has been trying to avoid confronting. Over the past year, the country witnessed some of the largest anti-immigration demonstrations in recent memory. Political rhetoric hardened, communities split over cultural, economic, and identity issues, and resentment, once scattered, began to consolidate. In Birmingham, those national pressures became personal. Rents rose sharply, food prices consumed savings, youth services already overstretched struggled to absorb growing needs. Mental health waiting lists lengthened to the point where help often arrived too late. Families found themselves juggling more stress than ever, while young people in particular slipped between the cracks. It is in this environment of uncertainty, frustration, and eroding trust that tonight's events found oxygen. Fireworks did not manufacture instability, they exposed it. Birmingham's eruption was not an anomaly, it was the visible surface of something deeper, the outward expression of pressures accumulating inside communities that feel increasingly disconnected from the institutions meant to serve them. And that truth is perhaps the most unsettling part of tonight's story. The violence was sudden, but the reasons behind it were not. As the night unfolded, a second realization took shape, one far more consequential than the spectacle of flashing lights and burning debris. Britain's ability to respond to unrest is itself reaching a breaking point. Prisons across the country are at or near maximum capacity, leaving offenders cycling in and out of custody with alarming speed. Court backlogs have grown so vast that justice has slowed to a crawl, and officers, already stretched thin, are left questioning whether the deterrence they rely upon still holds. For criminals, hesitation becomes opportunity. When word spreads that the system is overwhelmed, that consequences may be delayed or even avoided, the boundaries that once kept order intact begin to soften. And when policing becomes reactive rather than preventative, neighborhoods sense the shift immediately. Birmingham exposed this shift in real time. The fireworks were a symptom, the response, or lack of it, was the diagnosis. Tonight's violence spiraled not because officers were absent, but because the structure supporting them could no longer absorb another shock. And that raises a question the entire country must now grapple with. If this is what one night of concentrated pressure looks like, what happens when the pressures grow larger?
In the aftermath, attention inevitably turns to Westminster. But at a time when cities like Birmingham are grappling with rising instability, the political spotlight sits elsewhere, on renegotiations with Europe, on defending migration policy, on budget disputes and party infighting. The distance between political priorities and street-level reality has rarely felt wider. Residents watching the violence unfold want clarity. Officers want reinforcement. Communities want certainty. Instead, they hear familiar phrases about monitoring the situation, statements that acknowledge unrest without addressing the conditions beneath it. It leaves a sense of hesitation at the very moment the country needs decisiveness. And this gap between what government says and what the street feels is where instability grows. Birmingham's eruption is not just a policing failure or a community strain. It is a political warning. If leadership cannot move at the pace of crisis, then the crisis will set the pace for the country.
As the smoke fades and the city returns to a brittle quiet, the true meaning of tonight becomes clearer. Britain is not collapsing, but it is straining. The forces bearing down on the country, migration pressure, economic anxiety, youth unrest, policing fatigue, overcrowded prisons, and deepening political division, are converging in ways that make pockets of instability more likely, not less. Birmingham is not an outlier. It is a preview, a reminder that the line between order and disorder is far thinner than it once was, and that the pressures shaping modern Britain are beginning to surface in unpredictable and explosive ways. So now Britain faces a question it can no longer delay. Was tonight's violence a momentary rupture, destined to fade with the morning light, or was it an early sign of a country approaching the limits of what its institutions can contain? Because what happened in Birmingham was more than chaos. It was a message, and whether the nation listens will determine what comes next.
The latest release of Epstein files uncovered photos of Mr. Mandelson with no trousers on with an anonymous woman, and also revealed the then Business Secretary and Labour MP leaked sensitive UK government tax plans to the convicted sex offender and advised him to mildly threaten the Treasury.
They call him the Prince of Darkness because he has survived more political deaths than any figure in modern British history. But today, Peter Mandelson, the OG of political spin, is facing a scandal that even he might not be able to outrun. New files released from the Jeffrey Epstein investigation suggest that in 2009, while serving as business secretary, Mandelson allegedly leaked market-sensitive government information to the disgraced financier, including a £500 billion EU bailout plan. While SNP and Reform UK report him to the Metropolitan Police, a massive question hangs over 10 Downing Street. Why did Keir Starmer express full confidence in this man just days before these emails went public? Is this sleaze on steroids, or is the Prime Minister's judgment fundamentally broken? The core of the police report is a series of emails from 2009. At a time when the world was reeling from a financial crisis, Mandelson was allegedly giving Epstein advance notice of a £500 billion bailout. In the world of high finance, that kind of information is gold. But the sleaze goes deeper. Emails suggest an intimate, unethical closeness, with Mandelson allegedly advising Epstein on how to mildly threaten the then-Chancellor, Alistair Darling, over bankers' bonuses. Darling's own autobiography confirms he received an angry phone call exactly as Mandelson suggested. This wasn't just friendship, it was the manipulation of the British state for the benefit of an international predator. The real political danger here isn't Mandelson, it's Keir Starmer. Just before these documents were unsealed, the Prime Minister was prepared to appoint Mandelson as the UK's ambassador to the United States. Despite warnings that were reportedly raised as far back as the Gordon Brown era, Starmer's team seemed intent on bringing the Prince of Darkness back into the inner circle. Critics are now calling for Starmer to resign, arguing that his personal commitment to cleaning up politics is a sham if he continues to protect the Blairite old guard. If heads are to roll, the question is whether Starmer will sacrifice his Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, or if the cockroach of British politics will finally drag the Prime Minister down with him. But there is a darker contrast at play. While the government scrambled to manage the Mandelson fallout, they have remained silent on the domestic tragedies affecting ordinary British citizens. Just yesterday, we heard from the mother of Rhiannon White, who lost her daughter to a systemic failure in our borders. She has had zero contact from the government. The contrast is devastating. A red carpet defence for a disgraced peer, but a cold shoulder for a grieving mother. This is the two-tier reality that is currently setting the UK political landscape on fire.
Peter Mandelson has had more comebacks than Frank Sinatra, but this time the stake may finally have been driven through the heart of his career. The Metropolitan Police are now involved, and the Prince of Darkness is finding that even his shadow cannot hide the paper trail of the Epstein files. Keir Starmer promised a government of service, but right now it looks like a government of sleaze on steroids. The champagne corks may be popping in the offices of his enemies, but for the British taxpayer, the curiosity remains. How many more dark lords are hiding in the corridors of power? The silence from the Prime Minister isn't just a strategy, it's a confession. The game is up.